hopefully you can see my screen, and super excited right before the holidays to talk about some great stuff, because the ones here who are familiar with TMDL, as we call it internally, may have wondered what's up in terms of updates, etc. There hasn't been much in the public domain lately, and I thought, because in the last 2 months in particular, we actually had some significant updates. I bring everyone up to speed here. So let me find the right screen. So just a quick introduction. I'm Matthias Thierbach, based in London, although from Germany originally. Have worked in the analytics and Power BI space for quite a few years now, and been lucky enough to be invited by the Power BI product team as an external contributor last year. And the result of that was TMDL, which hence I've got a very close relationship with. So I contributed the original design and also the original implementation to the product, although it's hence been taken over by internal teams, as you can imagine. You can follow and find me on LinkedIn, and less so on Twitter these days. I'm not going to use the new name. I'm a bit old-fashioned. And otherwise on GitHub or YouTube. Cool. So I just want to give a very quick recap for anyone who may be new to TMDL, and then mostly talk about what's new and what we have in terms of history. Want to talk about what tools there are, and then hopefully have some time for Q&A as well. Awesome. So in terms of TMDL generally, we have, sorry, I just want to make sure I can see the teams as well. So here we go. TMDL is a language. It's a serialization format for tabular models, and it has 3 main objectives. It basically is a successor to TMSL or TMSL, the tabular model scripting language, which is JSON-based and has been around for a long time and has been supported across external tools as well. But TMSL has had some limitations, and those are precisely what TMDL is meant to address. So number one is TMSL as a JSON format is primarily designed for machines, not so much for humans. And so that's part one. You can see a side-by-side screenshot here, which hopefully makes that very clear. Part two, editing. If you TMDL is addressing pro developers, people who want to go deeper in terms of managing their projects, and people who want to be able to use any text editor for their source code, basically. And specifically when it comes to DAX and M expressions, using a text editor in the TMSL world would have been very challenging because of how those expressions are actually embedded in the JSON. TMDL addresses that. And again, you can hopefully see that very nicely in the screenshot. And then lastly, TMDL is built for collaboration, as in using source control and branching models. TMDL by default breaks out large complex projects into multiple smaller files, making it much easier for multiple people to collaborate on the same project, making it much easier to avoid merge conflicts, making it much easier to actually see nice and meaningful diffs when it comes to source control. Just a final note, this is a screenshot taken from one of Microsoft's slides documenting tabular model development. It shows the tree of object types that make up tabular model definitions. And TMDL basically replicates the structure and has a dedicated text-based definition for each of those object types. So, for example, table, column, measure, relationship, culture, and role. All of those show up as TMDL definitions. Last but not least, those are 3 links which may be useful, and those slides will be made available later on. Those are just links to some official docs on the Microsoft Docs, on the Power BI blog, as well as a recording of the very, very first public announcement of TMDL, which happened back in March at SQL Bits, where I was lucky enough to be able to actually present TMDL jointly with Gabi on stage, and it was a very exciting event. Okay, so let's talk about history, because as I said, a lot of things have changed, but we haven't talked much about that publicly. 1 second, just want to make sure I can see. So what I did recently was to actually create a GitHub repository. The link to it is on this slide, and that one is meant to document with a live project the evolution of TMDL. So there's a screenshot here which shows a breakdown across various previous releases, and we can see starting from the bottom up. We went from preview 1, so the very first public preview of TMDL in April, to preview 8, which was released earlier this month on the 8th of December. And for reference, you can also see what the corresponding internal version number for the TOM libraries was, as well as which versions of Tabular Editor and pbi-tools are aligned with those respective previews. Preview 8 is still very new, and we haven't had a public release of Tabular Editor or pbi-tools yet, but that's coming soon. I'm aware that Daniel was working on it, but it's obviously a holiday period, so he wasn't able to push that out yet. So we've got that, and I'm just going to switch over to the repository to show you what that looks like. So it's under my name called TMDL example, and the README file basically has the exact table I've just shown as a screenshot. That one will be updated moving forward, and then we basically have a single BIM file here. So that's a tabular model in TMSL format. And we have the corresponding TMDL extract. And basically what I did here is I created a dedicated pull request for each previous release of TMDL, which means if you want to see what's changed from one version to another, you can actually navigate to the corresponding pull request. So for instance, preview 8, the latest one, you can go to files changed, and you'll see in great detail for each file that was impacted by the TMDL update, what's changed. So if we're looking at this as an example, we can see two things. We had an empty line here previously. Now it's there. So, I mean, arguably that's not a very significant change, but the other one down here is this keyword, which was capitalized previously, is no longer capitalized now. And usually, you know, preview syntax changes have been along those kinds of lines. So there were a few which were more significant, but generally is this kind of stuff. This one is slightly bigger, where we can see that those colons are no longer emitted. So basically, when there is a nested object, and in this case, you know, connection details basically can be considered an object with protocol and address as properties. There is no longer a colon now. Colons only exist for symbol properties with simple values, like in this example. So that's the gist of what you can see here, and hopefully that helps for anyone, you know, who wants to understand the details in terms of tracing through. If you wanted to see, let's say, preview 7, which was the November release, you can do the exact same thing here and basically see for this particular project, what is the precise impact of the changes. So I'm not gonna go through every single PR now. That would not be very interesting. But what I wanted to point out, going back to the slides, I put some notes on those slides, basically pointing out specifically what everyone should be aware of. So looking at this slide for the preview 8 December release, there's a very big change in that TMDL, which was previously shipped as a separate NuGet package and a separate DLL, is now fully integrated into the TOM libraries. So there is now only a single DLL that contains TMDL and everything else. So that's a really big difference. And just to illustrate that a little bit, if we go to nuget.org, and this link is also on the slides, those are all the tabular object or tabular modeling related packages. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 here. And so previously, we had those TMDL packages, which were actually marked as pre-release. And the December release has the 19.72 version number, and you can see that the separate TMDL packages have not been updated accordingly. So basically, those two packages at the bottom, they're now deprecated. They're no longer relevant for TMDL. And instead, the 19.72, which is the latest December release, that's the one that contains TMDL. So big deal. And it obviously simplifies referencing bits and just indicates that TMDL is becoming a very integral part of Microsoft's support for tabular models. Secondly, this is more for developers. and people integrating with TMDL, you can now control serialization, encoding tabs versus spaces, whether or not sensitive information is included, line breaks. All of this is now exposed and can be customized. So that's also a big deal. Before December, all of that was hard-coded, and there was only one way. I've already pointed out how on nested objects, the codon was dropped. I've already pointed out how everything is now camel cased. Let me talk about the ref list shortly. This one is significant. Previously, what previously was partition expression is now partition source. There are good reasons for it. I'm not going to bore you with the details here, but that's a significant difference in terms of how the projects are serialized. And then this one, whenever there's a calculation group, the partition doesn't really have any meaningful information, so it's now actually dropped. Whenever there's a table of type calculation group, it's inferred that it will have the right type of partition. That no longer needs to be serialized. Let me talk about the ref list. That was actually a change that came in November. So if I go to VS Code, here we go. So this is a local view of the exact same repository. What we can see here is that in our root document, model.tmdl, we have those bits, ref table, customer date info, and so on and so forth. So that is an entire new syntax, again, which was introduced in November. And it is optional, and it is there for explicit ordering. Something which the initial versions of TMDL introduced by basically having an order property on any objects that happen to be serialized into subfolders. So table is the primary example here, right? So because each table comes through as a dedicated file in your file system, there's actually no way per se to know whether, for instance, the date table should be considered the first one in your tables, right? Because those are files, implicitly they would all come through alphabetically. And particularly when you have more complex models, you may want to actually control the order, and you may want to ensure that your most significant tables always show up at the top, for instance, and the less significant ones at the bottom. And for that reason, we have this ref table syntax here. So the order in which the tables are referenced in the model.tmdl file is the order in which they get included into the model. One very important note here is that Power BI Desktop does not honor this. Desktop always shows tables alphabetically right now, but if you use Tabular Editor or other external tools, you will actually see your tables in this specific order. So that's new, and a pretty big deal for developers, I'd say. Calculation group I talked about already. I'm just going to have a look at the chat whether there's anything at this point I may want to react to. No. Just do make me aware if there are any questions. 7.
I will let you know if there is any question.
Yes.
Right?
Thanks very much. All right. Okay, cool. So 7 November, And also, by the way, those two preview releases, December and November, arguably they were the most significant ones since the very initial preview. So, which is why it's worthwhile actually talking about them a little bit. They were significant in that there were substantial additions, as well as some substantial syntax changes. And whilst I talk about that, one other thing which is really important. The explicit goal is that after December, basically after what I just shown as preview 8, TMDL should remain as is. So it's there should no longer be any breaking or in other ways significant changes after this December release, which is also why we've seen a massive accumulation of changes very recently. It was to ensure that everything that was planned actually made it into this preview. And the goal is that from January, TMDL will be stable and will swiftly move to GA quality. There may well be one or two changes. I'm aware of one that's being discussed right now, but that should be an absolute exception, and it's definitely not planned for anything bigger to come. So, which is also why I thought having this talk today would be really useful, because you know, it also gives you some assurance if you want to invest in converting your projects to TMDL. Now would be a really good time, actually, because as I said, things are meant to be much more stable moving forward. Okay. Preview 7 had substantial additions. For instance, translations were supported for the very first time. And in fact, that's translation support is very cool. And I definitely want to show you what that looks like. So translations are part of cultures. Each culture, as you can see, is broken out into a dedicated file. And by the way, similar to what we've seen for tables, we have the same ref syntax for culture. So pretty much anything that is broken out into a subfolder is supported for explicit ordering. If you want to, that's completely optional. And so if we go into this culture, which is the German one, we can see there's a very, very neat and concise syntax as of November, allowing us to basically replicate the conceptual structure. So we've got model, we've got table, we've got column, and then for those items that should have a dedicated translation in the respective culture, they are referenced. And the items that can be translated for, I mean, that's not TMDL specific, that's tabular model specific, are basically display folder, caption, which is name, and description. So it's those three items that can be translated, and this is the syntax. Hopefully very intuitive, and something that, because it's so simple, can actually be handed over to a dedicated translator, because it would be pretty straightforward explaining this format. So that was added, and that's definitely something I'm super excited about, because translation management in the JSON format was substantially more complex. All right, how are we doing with questions? I think someone just raised their hands, or was it a mistake? Right, I can see a question in the chat here. will Power BI Desktop align with ref table order in the future? I can't give you a definitive answer here because, I mean, first of all, I'm not Microsoft, but also I don't even have any awareness. I would hope it will. Let's put it that way. But yeah, I can't. The best person to talk to on that would be Zoe, actually, on the product team. All right. So back to slides. What else did we have? Oh, yes. The November release also introduced a new file, database.timdal. That is relevant, for instance, for compat mode and compat level. Then we have a few sorting things. Yeah, everything else is stuff I've talked about already. The most significant ones for November was translations, role members, and the order management. And just to show what role members means, if we go into any of our role, we can see that this is, again, a very neat and concise syntax, which is really what Timdal is designed for in terms of specifying, in this case, an AD user and here a AAD group. So if you understand roles management in tabular models a little bit, you know that there are basically two types of members. You can have on-prem Active Directory members, and you can have cloud AAD members. The difference between them is the prefix. So AD member means on-prem, and group or user means it's cloud. And by the way, this one had a syntax change. So what we're looking at here is the November update. If I go back to the December update, we'll see that there was a further simplification. So if I go down to my role, here we go. So let me just make that a little bigger. Right. So previously, as we just seen in VS Code, we basically had this syntax where we had the explicit header members colon and then everything else was indented. That's been simplified. And now it looks like this. And again, this is the way it's going to stay. So now they're all prefix member, then the ID, which is usually something that looks like an email address, follows, and then we specify the type separated with an equal sign. And so that can be Active Directory, group, or user. Unfortunately, I don't have a user example here, but I should probably add one just to make it a better documentation. So that's that. Again, big deal because it means there's full feature parity and there is a very concise syntax. Any new questions? Additional considerations? Right, yeah, no. There was a question regarding Direct Lake and whether there would be anything extra to be considered, but no. For Direct Lake, it's just the only difference for Direct Lake is the partition source specification. So it's just a dedicated partition source type. Other than that, and that's already fully supported in Timdal. Other than that, there's nothing different. And then there's another question. The list of role members through Power BI service with this feature. I'm 90% sure that that is the case. But so basically, if you use the XMLA endpoint to deploy your models, I'm pretty sure that it's now supported for you to actually specify role members via XMLA, as opposed to having to use Power BI service. But I'm not 100% sure. So just take that with a grain of salt. If anyone here knows better, please drop in and make a note. Sorry about that. All right, so back to slides. Cool, so talked about this. Preview 6 only had bug fixes. Preview 5, the most significant one was actually the extension change. So when TMDL was released, the extension was .tmd, whereas ever since September, it's been changed to TMDL. And I've put a few things here regarding the July release, although, well, they're all fairly technical. I've got them here for reference, but it's probably not necessary to go into too much detail here. It would be better for us to have a bit more time for questions. So the next section I wanted to cover was tools and tooling support. But if there's anything else, syntax or history related, it might be useful to capture that now. I can wait a few seconds if anyone wanted to raise their hand. Otherwise, I'll move on. Okay. Yes.
It seems everything good now here. But
Okay.
if you have any question or anything you want to raise, just raise your hand or unmute yourself and shoot it.
I think we're good.
Yeah.
That's fine. So I'll continue. All right, cool. Cool, thanks very much. So tools, I've already mentioned Tabular Editor a few times, but I specifically wanted to talk about VS Code actually. So you can already see that I'm actually getting some syntax highlighting here. And this is because, as you can see down here, VS Code has actually detected that I've got a TMDL document open. And so it detects it using the file extension. And the magic that makes it all possible is that we actually have an official Microsoft language extension for VS Code, which is this one. The internal, I thought the internal name used to be shown here. Right. So maybe it's my resolution. So it's VS Code-TMDL. It's very early days. It has very limited support for TMDL at this point, mostly around syntax highlighting, but there's definitely a lot of there are lots of internal plans to give this one a bright and significant future. So definitely something you can install today just using VS Code extensions. Just look for TMDL as I have done. And obviously any future updates will come through automatically. So there's this. And then and basically what you get from it is you get, in most cases, syntax highlighting, which you can see here with the coloring. There are some, whenever there isn't explicit highlighting built in, it will just come through in the default color. So for instance, the ref syntax is not supported yet, which is why there isn't anything special done here, but there's definitely an internal team working on keeping that particular extension up to date. Now, the other one that showed up here is this one, Gerhard's Power BI extension, which is definitely something to be aware of because it's it's very powerful and quite mature at this point. And most importantly, Gerhard added explicit TMDL support at some point. So once you have the extension enabled, and once you've logged in with a user account that has access to Power BI tenant, you'll basically see a list of your workspaces here. And if I go to any of them, as you can see, and hopefully my connection doesn't drop, you can see your data sets are listed. You can right-click a data set and look at this. This is super exciting. There's an edit TMDL option here. Very cool indeed. So if I click that, it's going, here you can see that, it's going to download the model definition via the XMLA endpoint once I've authenticated. So it would be this one. And it's going to convert it to TMDL. There we go. So this is it. So that's what just came down from my live data set from that particular workspace. And I can now basically make edits here and then ultimately push that back up using the same XMLA endpoint back into my workspace. Super exciting. Obviously, right now, you really need to know what you're doing here because the TMDL extension at this point only does syntax highlighting. It doesn't do it doesn't give you IntelliSense or anything else that would make editing easier. But that is, as I said, that is something that's being worked on, and that will definitely come at some point. So yeah, super exciting. Just having a look here. So there was a question regarding the Visual Studio. I mean, I doubt it. I mean, as far as I'm aware, the Visual Studio extension for analysis services is in maintenance mode. As far, I have to prefix that. As far as I'm aware, there's no active development happening on that, and so I would doubt that it would ever get TMDL support. Development is now happening on VS Code and Power BI Desktop. Sue asked whether a service principal is required here. No. So this is using interactive authentication, as you've seen, right? So basically, as I was accessing that particular data set, it prompted me to basically log in with a real user rather than a service principal. Edit direct lake data set. I think at this point there are still limitations. You can tell I haven't followed direct lake datasets very closely lately because obviously it's a very fast-moving target. I still remember that initially there was read-only support for it, and that may well have changed in the meantime. So this really depends on whether or not XMLA editing for direct lake models is supported. What Power BI license do you need? Good question. So because this is using the XMLA endpoint, you need a license that gives you the XMLA endpoint, which is basically Premium or Fabric 64 plus. Timeline for reports being in TMDL. Well, TMDL is the tabular model definition language. So if you want to be very precise. This is never going to happen because it's a format that obviously is designed for models. There is work being done around report definitions to become more source control friendly as part of Power BI projects, PBIP. But from what I know and from what's been said publicly so far, this is all staying in JSON for now. There are no specific plans to come up with a new language other than JSON for it. PPU, yes, PPU absolutely works. I see. Okay, yeah. So someone confirmed direct click XMLA editing is supported, but apparently with some limitations. Again, I can't directly comment on that, unfortunately. So that's that, VS Code. Then the other thing I wanted to show was Tabular Editor, where you can obviously, as you always have been able to, you can open a file. In which case, so I can just open my BIM file and then it shows me the model and everything, or I can open from folder, and that option supports both TMDL as well as the proprietary tabular editor save to folder format. So if I go here and actually select that TMDL folder, I get an error. Very good. I thought, let me just double check. So this one should be preview 7 because I'm on the main branch. Oh, actually, I know. Yeah. There was, so I can explain that. Basically, because preview 7, as we've seen on the slides, just going to bring that up as a reminder. So preview 7 introduced the database.timdal file, which actually contains the compat mode and compat level, as we can see here. So these ones, and they're actually really crucial when it comes to parsing and deserializing a model accurately. And I believe that this is not something Tabular Editor in the latest version is accounting for, unfortunately, which is why we just had that issue. But if I go and switch back to an earlier version, or if I go to preview 6, should be fine. The preview 6 will not have the separate database.timdal file. You can see this is now showing up as practically deleted. Instead, preview 6 had those properties shown as part of model. And if I now go back to Tabular Editor, open from folder, let's just make sure. So this should, nope. Okay, sorry. My apologies. So I'm working with Daniel, making sure that the database.timdal related changes are accounted for moving forward. This particular example is sort of has all sort of niche features built in for demo purposes, which is why it's more likely to actually show those kinds of issues. But I can go the other way around. I can open the file from, well, I still have my BIM file open, and I can then go to preferences and ensure that for serialization mode, I've got TMDL selected, and can then say save to folder, and I'm just going to create a new folder and call it TE TMDL, Tabular Editor TMDL, and use that one. So here we go. So this has now been exported from Tabular Editor, and it may well break again. I have a feeling it may, because it, okay, let's see. Yeah, there we go. Same problem. The issue really is that Tabular Editor at this point doesn't know that this has to be loaded using the Power BI mode. But again, just wait for the next release from Daniel, which will have the preview 8 built in, and then we're good. All right. So just going back to my slides. Here we go. Done that. So got a few links here for the two VS Code extensions, and then just for reference, Tabular Editor, pbi-tools, and NuGet. And yeah, definitely appreciate that was quite a swift run through, because you know, there were quite a lot of changes that have come up over the last few months, but hopefully that was useful in terms of understanding, you know, we've had 8 previews, understanding some of the key changes, most importantly, understanding that we shouldn't expect any further significant syntax changes from now on. So let's see if there are any further questions here. So I think there was one regarding report.json. Right. So yeah, let me. I mean, obviously this is off topic technically, but I'm more than happy to answer that if I find one. I think this one as an example. Right, so if we look at this, so Power BI Developer Mode, PBIP, is what we're currently getting from Microsoft in terms of source control for PBIX, for Power BI projects. And so the current state for reports gives us one single JSON file that is highly complex, and most importantly, has the big disadvantage that all the, let's say, significant definitions that we ultimately need in order to understand what particular visuals and pages, how they're defined. These ones are sort of gobbled together in very, very long, virtually unreadable lines of embedded JSON, right? So you can see here, this is over 1,700 characters. This one is even longer. So this is the status quo with respect to reports. And so arguably this is not human readable, and this would make editing really complex. Now, if you know what pbi-tools has done regarding reports, it basically invented a proprietary format where a folder structure is used in order to break out all page and visual definitions into single, small, and readable files. And that is basically what Microsoft is now working on as the evolution for PBIP. I can say that because it's already been talked about publicly, so I'm not reading anything here. That is definitely known as a goal. And so that's what I was talking about earlier, just explaining, just answering this particular question. Yes, so model.timdal indeed only has the specific properties relating to the model node, and everything else is split into files. Absolutely. And okay, cool. Yeah, any further questions? Other than that, can always ping me on LinkedIn or so. Report level measures. So in pbi-tools, report level measures, I'm not sure whether there is one here. There should be, actually. No, I don't have report level measures here, but in pbi-tools, they would show up here under the root level config.json. In the new PBIP that will come at some point in the future, so no timelines, there will definitely be much better support for those. Back to you,
Okay,
Vahid.
perfect. Yep. Thank you so much. That was a great session.